Hello, I'm Esther Yidu. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. U.S. President Joe Biden explains to the American people and the world why he withdrew from the presidential race. Accusations against French authorities for uprooting migrants and others around Paris prior to the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games. And a Zambian female is defying odds in a male-dominated technology industry by leading the conversation on the future of artificial intelligence, automation, and information security. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin in the United States, where President Joe Biden on Wednesday night in a televised address explained to American citizens and to the world why he decided not to run for re-election in the 2024 presidential race. Biden outlined the urgent challenges he sees as the nation heads toward a November vote. VOA White House correspondent Anita Powell reports.
U.S. President Joe Biden made the stunning decision to exit the presidential race from behind a screen, choosing to drop the news online. 3 days later, in an Oval Office speech that was at times hopeful, at times determined, and at times wistful, he explained why. Biden spoke of his 5 decades in public office, touted his presidential record of domestic and political achievements, but then called for energetic new leadership to face tomorrow's challenges.
But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation. You know, there is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. But there's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now.
Biden also thanked Vice President Kamala Harris, who was taken to the campaign trail with his endorsement and enough delegate pledges to net the nomination. He described her as experienced, tough, and capable, but added, "The choice is up to you." He did not name-check the Republican in the race, but analysts say Biden's stark warnings all point to one man.
He talked about polarization, he talked about violence and political violence. Those are all things that harken back to Donald Trump and his presidency. He talked about the threats facing the nation when he first took office, January 2021. And so that was certainly about Donald Trump. But yeah, this wasn't a place for him to talk about Donald Trump. It wasn't a place for him to give a campaign speech.
The president said his job will now focus on domestic challenges like civil rights and voter freedom, gun safety reforms, the quest to end cancer, and Supreme Court reform. He also cited myriad challenges the U.S. faces abroad, with wars raging in Gaza and Ukraine, and China becoming more emboldened in the Indo-Pacific. These foreign fires, analysts say, are likely to burn in the minds of concerned voters.
That's really the concern I think people will have, is how does a lame duck president deal with foreign policy crises?
We'll find out Thursday when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visits the White House. The Israeli leader is also holding 2 other meetings while in the U.S., with Harris and Trump. But for the final act of this presidency, Biden remains the protagonist on America's biggest stage.
He's like an athlete that is going to make the Hall of Fame and is retiring and, gets the cheers from the crowds, finally, for a long 50-year tremendous career.
Biden clearly understood that this address would be a dramatic peak. So he used his final words to break the fourth wall with a message as old as America.
The great thing about America is here, kings and dictators do not rule, the people do. History is in your hands. The power is in your hands. The idea of America lies in your hands.
Anita Powell, VOA News, Washington.
For more perspective on President Biden's address, I'm joined from here in Washington by Kwaku Nuama, a professor at the School of International Service at American University. Professor Nuama, it's great to have you back on Africa 54. What's the main takeaway, though, from President Biden's address last night?
Well, Esther, this was a sad speech, but it was a proper speech that was given within the right context with references to past presidents and great leaders from American history. The four things that I took away was the explanation he offered for why he's quitting the race, the fact that he presented this as something that he had to do to save democracy. But then also he went on to endorse Kamala Harris, and then his own summary of what he considers to be the accomplishments of his time in office. And then the fourth thing is the wish list that he put forward for the remaining 6 months of his time in office. I know we'll talk about that later.
You mentioned, talking about his achievements in a way, but what really did he drum home here when he said Americans are going to have to make a choice between moving forward or backward, between hope and hate, unity and division, and he went on and on.
Well, that's the inflection point he was referencing. And you remember he talked about Benjamin Franklin's great quote, a republic if you can keep it. That is a call to Americans to step up and help defend the republic. And by that, he meant that we have to choose between Donald Trump's MAGA movement, which is going to destroy the country, and the republic and the democracy that people like Biden have been fighting for. And so basically, this is a challenge to Americans to step up, vote to preserve the republic.
So the president has achieved quite a lot in the one term that he has, nearly served, because he's still going to be there for another 4 months. But he has a bucket list of things he wants to accomplish, and by November. What do you think should be his priority that's going to even shape his legacy as he exits this stage?
Well, he has an incredible list of things that he wants to do. Considering the fact that within the past 3 and something years, he's not been able to do many of those things, I pretty much doubt that he will be able to accomplish the big things on that bucket list. He's a lame duck president. He's not going to be able to get Supreme Court reform. He's not going to be able to do abortion. He's not going to be able to do gun violence. But he can do little things. He can do little things like Trump-proofing NATO by advancing some kind of financial support for Ukraine that Trump cannot disrupt, were he to win again. He can probably get his cancer moonshot program done, because I don't think Republicans are going to fight him on that. But he can do little things in the margins. He can use the presidential pardons powers, for example, to help give freedom to people who have been incarcerated for small things. But generally, when you are a lame duck president, people tend to ignore you. So one of the things on that list, for example, is Gaza. He's not going to be able to do much on Gaza because everybody's going to be waiting to see who wins the next election, see if they can get a better deal from that person.
Professor, well said. Thank you very much, Professor Kwaku Nwoama of the School of International Service at American University.
Thanks for having me.
President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are meeting separately with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House on Thursday, just one day after Netanyahu gave a fiery address to a divided U.S. Congress, with many Democratic lawmakers boycotting his speech and protesters surrounding the U.S. Capitol. But congressional Republicans say the speech was key to reaffirming America's commitment to its Middle Eastern ally in the midst of the 10-month-old war with Hamas. VOA's congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson has more.
For the first time since the October 7th Hamas attack that left 1,200 Israelis dead and some 240 hostages captured, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed U.S. lawmakers in person Wednesday.
It's a clash between those who glorify death and those who sanctify life. For the forces of civilization to triumph, America and Israel must stand together.
Calling anti-Semitism the world's oldest hatred, Netanyahu spoke directly to protesters.
When the tyrants of Tehran, who hang gays from cranes and murder women for not covering their hair, are praising, promoting, and funding you, you have officially become Iran's useful idiots.
Gaza's health ministry, which does not distinguish civilians from combatants, says more than 39,000 Palestinians have died since the beginning of hostilities. Netanyahu addressed the International Criminal Court's allegations of Israeli war crimes.
Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has shamefully accused Israel of deliberately starving the people of Gaza. This is utter, complete nonsense.
Several high-profile Democrats, including Vice President Kamala Harris and former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, did not attend the speech. Senator Jack Reed, who serves on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, explained his reasons for boycotting on Tuesday.
Netanyahu's made common cause with far-right extremists who pursue their own agendas at the expense of Israel's security. These extremists have been elevated to some of the highest cabinet positions in the government and have encouraged Netanyahu's most misguided policies.
Netanyahu was welcomed by congressional Democratic and Republican leadership Wednesday.
This is a very important time. Our bipartisan congressional leadership recognized it as such and invited him here because our dear ally Israel is in an existential fight for its very existence, and that fight extends to every one of its borders.
Some families of Israeli hostages protested the speech, calling on Netanyahu to agree to a U.S. proposed ceasefire. He outlined his own vision for a post-war Middle East.
The day after we defeat Hamas, a new Gaza can emerge. My vision for that day is of a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza. Israel does not seek to resettle Gaza, but for the foreseeable future, we must retain overriding security control there.
Netanyahu's address is key to maintaining U.S. support for Israel, but comes at a time when domestic American politics is taking center stage.
He is going to be trying to at least halt an erosion in support among Democrats and try to build credit with Republicans who he assesses are much more likely to be in power after the November elections.
Netanyahu is set to meet with U.S. President Joe Biden and Vice President Harris, as well as former President Donald Trump, later this week. Catherine Gibson, VOA News.
For more on the Israeli Prime Minister's fiery address, VOA's Paul Ndiho joins us live from Capitol Hill. Hello, Paul. You know, this is not the first time for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to address the U.S. Congress, but how was his address received by legislators?
Pretty significant indeed, but not historic in the sense that this was the fourth time Benjamin Netanyahu was addressing the U.S. joint session of Congress. But for what is important, he was able to thank the United States people for their generosity. He thanked President Joe Biden, the U.S. Congress for continued supporting him over the last couple of months where he has had to engage. He has had an active war in Gaza, and of course Israel's survival depends on the United States. So it was very, very important that he conveys that message to the American people who are largely supporting his cause.
Paul, Netanyahu's speech did stir a range of reactions from the divided Congress. But what are some of the key points that these lawmakers are expressing?
Certainly, the speech itself did not land very, very well. When you talk to Democrats, this was a very, very partisan speech. When you talk to Republicans, he hit the right points. But clearly, this was a speech meant to sway some of those people, especially Democrats, who have had different sets of opinions when it comes to how he has run the war in Gaza. But when listening to a lot of people, when you look at his ratings back home and you look at what he has been able to do going forward, that optics don't look good for him. So he's looking for a way to save his own political career and certainly to stay as the Prime Minister of Israel once the war ends.
Now, Paul, in contrast, now, you know, we're very close to the Capitol here. There were a couple of things happening outside of the Capitol Hill. Hundreds of people were outside there protesting against Netanyahu as he addressed congressional leaders there. What prompted this protest?
That's a great question, Esther. You know, these young people or Generation Z people, they are not swayed by the politics that we see. They are united by one thing: what they read, what they see on social media, the images they see coming from Gaza. That's what unites these people. And the protests here in DC, it's not the first time they're happening. Almost every week there are protests happening here in Washington, DC. Across the country, we've seen people protesting. Like before schools broke down for summer, every school campus in the United States was protesting against the war in Gaza. So what we saw yesterday was more of a continuation of what we've been seeing over the last couple months since the war started in Gaza.
Paul, many thanks for your reporting. VOA's Paul Ndiho coming to us live from Capitol Hill. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says the death toll from two massive landslides in Ethiopia has risen to at least 257, and that number is expected to dramatically rise. Ethiopia's National Disaster Risk Management Commission said Tuesday the death toll was at 229 following a heavy rain landslide that buried people in the Gofa zone in southern Ethiopia region on Sunday night. Then a second landslide engulfed others who had gathered to help on Monday morning. Ugandan police are detaining several people in Kampala on Thursday during a second day of anti-corruption protests. Video broadcast by local media shows the demonstrators are demanding the resignation of the parliament speaker. Drawing inspiration from weeks of youth-led protests in neighboring Kenya that forced the president there to withdraw proposed tax hikes, many young Ugandans began demonstrating this week against alleged graft by elected leaders. The police quickly shut down a planned march to Parliament on Tuesday, but they arrested at least 73 young protesters, according to Chapter 4 Uganda, an organization providing legal services to those detained. Rights groups are accusing French authorities of social cleansing ahead of the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics by uprooting migrants, sex workers, and others in Paris, undermining promises of making these games the most inclusive ever. The government says it's simply trying to address a long-standing problem. Lisa Brandt has the details.
Morning evacuation of a migrant camp on the edge of Paris. Its residents are uncertain about what's next.
They told us to come here and they would find housing for us. With the Olympic Games, we can't stay here. They're going to resettle us somewhere.
These kinds of evictions are not new. Rights groups have criticized them before. But activists question the size and the timing of this latest campaign, coming right before the Paris Olympics.
How we describe all this, because it's not only this week, it has started long before, it's called, we call it the social cleansing of Paris. So it's basically, because of the Olympics, the will to empty the streets of all misery and poverty.
Borsati's charity is part of an activist network called The Other Side of the Medal. It claims hundreds of people have been relocated in the months before the Games. Not just migrants, they say, but also Roma, sex workers, and others are under pressure. Some migrants have reportedly been sent to locations far from the capital, losing precarious jobs and access to social services. French authorities say migrants can choose where they want to go.
We've been doing these operations every week for years. They offer shelter in the Île-de-France region to people living in difficult and unsanitary conditions. We've also regularly sent people to other French regions because emergency shelters in Paris are saturated. So we propose to people who have just arrived without any attachments to Paris to try their luck elsewhere.
Et on propose à ces gens-là qui n'ont pas d'ancrage parisien, qui arrivent tout juste en France.
The evacuations come amid rising anti-immigration sentiments in France, boosting the popularity of the far-right National Rally Party. Paris's leftist city hall blames national authorities for not providing migrants with enough solutions.
It's been months that we've asked the government to take control of this situation, which is under their exclusive competency. We continue to offer migrants places for shelter and support, but the state needs to take its responsibilities.
For now, these migrants will be offered a place to stay around Paris, but they could well be back on the streets when the games are over. Lisa Bryant, VOA News, Paris.
Still to come, a Zambian technology expert leads the conversation on the future of artificial intelligence, automation, and information security. We'll be right back.
Amid the climate crisis, women in some African countries often find themselves left behind by their husbands who migrate far away for work because of the drought affecting their region for years. Now alone, these abandoned women say they struggle to feed their children, and some never see their husbands again. On the next edition of Our Voices, we'll take a closer look at climate widows on the continent and how they are combating and surviving the environmental crisis and the impacts on their lives. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
You're watching Africa 54, coming to you live from the Voice of America headquarters here in Washington, D.C. In other news, the International Organization for Migration says more than a dozen migrants have died and at least 150 others are missing after their boat capsized off the coast of Mauritania in northwest Africa on their way to Europe, triggering a frantic search and rescue operation. There were 300 migrants on the boat that flipped over Monday near the Mauritanian capital, Nouakchott. Nigerian government officials held an emergency meeting Wednesday in response to nationwide protests planned for next month over governance issues and the high cost of living. Nigerian General Edward Buba says the military will intervene to prevent any violence at demonstrations by citizens. And the World Health Organization says deaths from road accidents in Africa are increasing, with 250,000 lives lost in 2021 alone. The deaths and injuries on African roads are blamed on poor road safety standards, as few countries enforce laws against speeding and drunken driving, or laws that mandate the use of motorcycle helmets, seat belts, and child restraints. A female technology expert in Zambia is defying the odds in a male-dominated industry. Sarah Luyele Njamu, a technology entrepreneur, is leading the conversation on the future of artificial intelligence, automation, and information security. Kathy Short explains from Lusaka.
This is Sarah Luyele Njamu. She is one of the few women experts on artificial intelligence in Zambia, working as Chief Executive Officer for the software company CompuConnect Education. Although the use of AI in the country is relatively new, she says access to finance remains a barrier preventing women from entering the technology sector.
For some reason, people don't seem to have much belief that women are able to do big things. So once you approach, institutions, lending institutions, they turn us down. But we are saying we've got the skills, we've got the talent, and we are able to scale as we've been able to expand in several countries.
Njamu is also the initiator and host of the Future of AI in Africa Global Summit. The summit brings together experts from various African countries to discuss African technological solutions and challenges.
By harnessing the power of AI, we can drive efficiency, scalability, and tailored solutions that speak to our specific needs as the people of the continent. AI must be seen as a tool of empowerment, capable of bridging divides and fostering an inclusive future where everybody is able to participate meaningfully.
A recent Microsoft report estimates that AI could inject $1.5 trillion into the African economy by 2030. However, as of 2022, only 30% of the workforce in AI consists of women, according to the World Economic Forum. Njamu is trying to change that. She wants to see more women and girls' participation, but she says they face gender bias.
We want more girls to come into this space so that they can leverage themselves. But more than that, it's important for more women to be involved just so that we can bring a balanced perspective. As you know, bias is one of the big challenges that we face when it comes to the development of AI solutions.
The Zambia National Women's Lobby, a non-profit organization advocating for gender equality, is happy with Njamu's success. Gordon Nachibinga is its acting executive director. He says his organization would like to see more women and girls get involved in developing AI content across the African continent to achieve gender equality.
I think it's interesting, actually, to have women at the apex of artificial intelligence, and I believe that apart from being a model of other women that are aspiring to be in that space, I think she occupies an influential position to ensure that some of the issues that are affecting gender equality are addressed.
Zambian officials like Felix Mutati, the Minister of Technology and Science, think that AI can have a positive impact. Speaking at the opening of the Future of AI Global Summit in Lusaka in June, he said such technology has an untapped potential.
When we harness AI, it is bound to change the shape of our industry in an unprecedented manner. It will drive innovation and entrepreneurship exponentially. And indeed, it will create new opportunities yet to be imagined.
Experts say many women are needed in artificial intelligence to contribute towards economic development in Africa. Kathy Short, VOA News, Lusaka, Zambia.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.